Okay. Good evening and welcome to our debate. My name is Jessica Bolds and I will be acting as the introducer and summarizer for our debate. The topic we will debate today is service delivery for transition age youth and adults, empowerment versus care. We will be conducting this debate in an informal format, developing as our argument for empowerment. Using supported employment, vocational rehabilitation, and transition services. And we will develop our argument against care by using barriers for cost of vocational rehabilitation, failed transition services, and employers' negative outlooks. Let's begin by introducing our team. You'll have me, Jessica Bolds, as your summarizer, Kendall Perry as our researcher for both sides of the argument, Henrietta Hand as our illustrator, and Ashley Formosa as our fielder. As outlined by the IDEA, transition services are designed to facilitate the youth with disabilities movements from school to post-secondary education, employment, housing, social relationships, and healthcare. With the appropriate support and gradual exposure, the adolescents with significant life challenges can learn how to trust and engage with others. They can become part of their community, develop self-efficacy, and become competent as they transition into adulthood. In fact, securing an employment plan is an important objective in the lives of individuals with autism. As reported by Autism Speaks, 50,000 autistic teens turn 18 each year without marketable skills. With a nearly 90% unemployment and underemployment rate for individuals with autism, job prospects for adults with autism are crushingly bleak. Often, due to communication and/or behavior challenges, students with autism have limited opportunities for career development and work experience while in high school. The lack of employment for adults with autism creates a heightened sense of isolation, dependency, and dependence on others, which negatively impacts society as a whole. Now let's begin with the debate by defining these terms. Empowerment is defined as an acquired knowledge and learned skills needed to maximize independence and self-sufficiency. The most effective transition education program includes a collaborative learning environment that stimulates real-world experiences and incorporates daily community-based instruction in a natural setting. IDEA's federal special education law requires that school districts assist students with disabilities in making their transition from school to work and life as an adult. Agencies such as career centers and vocational rehabilitation are very helpful in assessing the individual's strengths and preferences. It is important that individuals with autism have opportunities such as volunteering, internships, and job sampling to build their strengths and minimize their challenges before their work experiences begin. CARE is defined as human service agencies along with educational agencies convening interdisciplinary teams which work collaboratively with adolescents and their parents or caregivers. These teams then create comprehensive education, transition, care, or treatment plans for the individuals with disabilities. Typically, these teams convene for adolescents who are thought to be in need of intensive support. CARE can also be defined as systems of legislations, laws, people and institutions that impeded or withhold progress of a specific individual. CARE can be isolating. CARE can be misrepresented as affection and help in certain instances or disguised as supportive, but really is only beneficial to one party involved. CARE impacts an individual's ability to become empowered. Now, I will present the facts of our argument. As previously stated in the introduction, we define empowerment as acquired knowledge and learned skills to maximize independence and self-sufficiency. With that definition in mind, and for the purpose of this debate, empowerment will include supported community employment, vocational rehabilitation services, and transitional services. These three topics each utilize different but similar methods and concepts to give the individual with a disability the empowerment necessary to become as independent as possible. I will now continue on by briefly summarizing each topic before Kendall explains further the research found to support each of these empowering concepts. To start, supported employment refers to the use of a job coach or employment specialist to obtain employment within the community. Supported employment increases independence by taking individuals with disabilities out of the traditional segregated setting of a workshop or day service and providing an environment in which the individual is integrated into the community for work, increasing the socialization between that individual and other typically developing people. Kendall will now discuss the research found in support of supported employment.
In a study by Cook et al., 1,273 individuals with mental illness from facilities in 7 different states assigned to either a supported employment group or a service as usual condition and followed for 2 years. The service as usual varied between states as the facilities were given leeway in choosing their comparison conditions. The participants were interviewed every 6 months and employment status along with services were tracked on a weekly basis. After 2 years, the experimental group were more likely to achieve competitive employment and were more likely to work 40 or more hours in a given month. It also had higher earnings per month. These 6-day treatment centers converted their services to supported employment. In one sample, the participants were considered to have no rehabilitation potential program for 8 years. 117 participants and 187 in the comparison group. The follow-up data showed that 38% of the experimental group were competitively employed compared to 15% of the comparison group. Bannerman, Sheldon, Sherman, and Harkick suggest that federal and state faculties want to promote and empower individuals as these services will provide needed skills to lessen the overall impact on government funding. Disabilities should be empowered and taught daily living skills, have choices about how and what they will learn, taught how to make choices, and overall how to exercise their rights to make those choices in any and all settings that they live, perform, and exist in.
Furthermore, as stated in the introduction, transitional services are defined as the period of time when adolescents are moving into adulthood and are concerned with planning for education, careers, healthcare, financial benefits, housing, and independent living. With that in mind, the goal of transitional services is to educate and empower the individual and their team with making the best plan for the individual's future, which will promote independence and focus on that person's goals and interests. Kendall will now discuss research in support of transitional services.
Trainer, Morningstar, and Murray took data from the National Longitudinal Transition Study and using a secondary analysis, examined the characteristics and quality of transition services for those with high incidence disabilities. The sample included 2,400 students with high incidence disabilities who were surveyed and interviewed along with teachers and school administrators. They found that nearly all students with high incidence disabilities were receiving transition services. The finding was that the majority of the students, educators, and families played a significant role in transition services. This type of involvement has been empirically linked to successful post-school transitions. Moderately positive student outcomes were reported for adolescents who received transition services that pertained to skills, self-determination skills, money management, and employment-related skills.
Finally, vocational rehabilitation is a process in which a counselor, known as a VR counselor, will work with a team typically including the individual wanting employment, their employment specialist or job coach, and whatever other team members necessary, which could be parents, guardians, a close mentor, paid staff, etc., to come up with the employment goal. The VR counselor will then provide professional counseling to overcome potential barriers that individual might come across while searching for or training in community employment. VR is an empowering tool for individuals with disabilities that want to gain employment based on their services. Kendall will now discuss research found on vocational rehabilitation.
In a study of 5,000 participants from three different disability groups, data was taken from the U.S. Department of Education Rehabilitation Service Administration to analyze employment outcomes. The disability groups that were studied included sensory communicative disorders, such as visual or hearing impairments, such as arthritis or spinal cord injury, and mental impairments like depression, schizophrenia, or learning disabilities. The effectiveness of vocational rehabilitation counseling was examined, and the data showed that 62% of the group were gainfully employed. Sensory and communicative disabilities had a significantly higher successful employment rate compared to people with disabilities who had 56%, impairments who had 55%.
So care is defined by the Merriam-Webster dictionary as many things, one being things that are done to keep someone healthy, safe, etc. Based on this definition, as well as our research, we will use the definition of care as providing advocacy for an individual that is incapable to do so themselves to keep that individual safe and healthy. Also noted in the introduction, care can be defined as systems of legislations, laws, people, and institutions that impeded or withhold progress of a specific individual. Care can be isolating. Care can be misrepresented as affection and help in certain instances, or disguised as supportive, but really is only beneficial to one party involved. In a nutshell, the team is there to support the individual and basically protect him or her from negative stigma that comes from having a disability diagnosis by providing care. For the purpose of this debate, team care will represent the barriers of the costs of VR, failed transitional services, and the negative outlook employers have on hiring individuals with disabilities. I will now continue on by briefly summarizing each topic before Kendall explains further the research found to support each of these caring concepts. To start, Social Security pays vocational rehabilitation agencies to provide these counseling and supported employment services. Basically, it costs federal dollars to provide VR counseling and supported employment. The cost of VR services varies depending on the disability and the length of time that person is receiving these services. The costs also vary depending on the state, as each state has their own budget. For example, from 2013, California spent $525,123,818 between federal and state funding, serving 72,030 people, while Michigan spent $119,032,502 in 2014 between federal and state funding, serving 34,435 people, based on Florida Legislature's Office of Program Policy Analysis and Government Accountability VR memo from January 5th, 2015. Kendall will now discuss more research on why VR costs would support team care.
The rapid rise in the rate of autism has led to concern about the affordability of supported employment in the future. As autism rates rise and more people need services, costs rise as well. In a study of the database of the Rehabilitation Services Administration by Cimarron and Cohen, the costs and the effects of vocational rehabilitation were analyzed. Included 11,569 individuals who received VR services from 2002 to 2006. For this study, the term successfully employed was defined as a case being closed because an employment outcome within an integrated setting had been obtained. All other reasons for closure were coded as unsuccessfully employed. In 2002, 1,534 people with autism received VR services. That amount increased by 121% to 3,397. The study showed that for every extra dollar earned by individuals with autism, it cost the VR program $26.74. The study also showed that the cost of VR services was higher for those with autism. These higher costs, in addition to the 10 to 17% annual increase in the rate of school-age children with autism, paints a picture of exponentially higher costs of VR in the future.
Next, transitional services. While great in theory, have not been proven to have a great follow-through. As stated previously, transitional services are formed so all members of the individual's team are present and on the same page to empower that person's independence. With that being said, it can oftentimes be difficult for all team members to follow through with their specific duties. From personal experience working in employment services, I have heard parents of clients fresh out of high school saying that their case manager did not know about a specific service or their teacher was unaware of the next step for their child, or some team member was supposed to assist with a specific service and never did. Many failed attempts at transitional services have been documented. Kendall will now discuss failed transitional services in further detail.
Was examined from the National Longitudinal Transition Study to determine the predictors of successful employment outcomes of special education students. 2,000 students were followed for 4 years, and the data showed that some of the predictors included career awareness training, computer skills, and having had a job while in high school, but receiving vocational services in high school and transition planning during high school with competitive employment. This signifies that the current services are not meeting the needs of this population. Other data from this study, which included parental interviews, showed that 23.5% of parents rate transition services as not useful at all, and 48.4% stated it was only somewhat useful.
Finally, it is no secret that there is a negative stigma that comes to having a disability. When you state that so-and-so has a disability, employers, who are not taught otherwise, will think that employing someone with a disability diagnosis is going to be more work than what they need. There are many myths to hiring someone with a disability, such as people with disabilities don't have the right skills for business, accommodations cost too much, hiring people with disabilities will make the employer vulnerable to litigation, and many more. Kendall will now discuss research found to support the idea that employers have a negative outlook on hiring people with disabilities.
In a survey by Kay, Jans, and Jones, and supervisors working for employers who did not always comply with ADA standards were asked why employers did not hire people with disabilities. The results showed that the primary employers did not hire people Reasons were lack of awareness as to how to deal with workers with disabilities and their accommodations, and fear of being stuck with a worker who can't be disciplined or fired, of a lawsuit. Other reasons that 70% of responders agreed upon: assessing an applicant's ability to perform job tasks, concern over extra costs, and concern about job performance. With more awareness and training for employers, some of these ideas can be challenged without the need for supported employment. Sheldon, Sherman, and Harkick addressed the ideals around care, surrounding facilities, and the institutions who serve those with disabilities. Assume the right to choose and provide for individuals under their care. Activities, schedules, and simple preferences are made on behalf of those with a disability because it's simply easier and more time efficient for workers to make these choices on their own without causing potential behaviors or disruption to the lives of those they serve. And basic liberties are in turn taken on by service workers and third parties as it improves administration, time, and costs. These decisions also appeal to board of directors. These personal liberties, such as individuals having an input on their treatment when appropriate, and any choices and opportunities of staff to keep situations calm, structured, and efficient. Avoiding unnecessary inflation, ER. Service providers remain focused on the opinions of third parties and use these pressures to enable services that are cost-effective, disruptive.
Now Henrietta will present visuals results of surveys as it relates to our topics.
I'm going to explain some of the data that are presented graphically in the studies that have been cited in this debate. Please bear with me while I share my screen. I will begin with the graphs that are in favor of empowerment. These graphs are from the study by Cook and others, 2005. They represent the experimental group who received supported employment with squares and the control group who did not receive supported employment with triangles. The top left graph represents the average percentage of participants who are competitively employed. The experimental group is significantly higher in this graph than the control group. The top right graph shows the average percentage of participants who work 40 or more hours per month. Again, the experimental group has a higher rate. And finally, the bottom graph depicts the average number of dollars earned per month. Once again, the supported employment group earns more dollars per month than the controlled group, as much as approximately $50 more in these last data points. Next, we have Bond and others, 2004, who demonstrate significant increase in employment rates after converting from a day treatment model to a supported employment model. The light gray represents the pre-conversion employment rates, and the black represents the post-conversion employment rates. And as you can see, in every instance of conversion, the supported employment is much higher. This study also provides data on employment rates in 9 randomized controlled trials of supported employment. These trials have random dates and were representative of 9 different states. On the pro-care side of the debate, Kay and others, 2011, did a survey of employers to find out why they might be hesitant to hire someone with disabilities. The top 3 reasons are worry about the cost of accommodations the person with disabilities might require, a lack of knowledge about how to handle the needs of a person with disabilities, and fear of being unable to discipline or fire a person with disabilities. And as you can see here, 80% or more of the respondents were in agreement with these statements. They also ask about reasons for not retaining employees with disabilities. The top 3 answers were similar to the previously stated reasons. A lack of knowledge of how to handle workers with disabilities. They're afraid that the workers who might develop disabilities will become a liability to them, and they're worried about the cost of providing reasonable accommodations so that the workers with disabilities can do their jobs. And again, about the same number, the same percentage of respondents were in agreement, 80% or so or more. That is all of our illustrations for right now. Next, we'll have Ashley, who's our fielder, and she's going to answer some questions about our topics.
Thanks, Henrietta. So I'm just going to go over some of the questions that people have written in and asked us. Our first question is, what legal examples are there related to this debate? So some legal issues surrounding care may focus on the government's red tape, which proves detrimental to the overall growth and opportunities provided to those with ASD. State and federal laws, legislatures, and district-wide boundaries can be limiting to one's right to empowerment and independence that can be gained from proper facilitated services for all ages. For example, the government imposes age cutoffs, forcing wait lists, and in Canada, there is little regulation in terms of who and what constitutes a special educator. The training provided to meet these qualifications are at times inappropriate and insufficient, leaving trained staff as lead supporters in the ASD community who have little background, diminishing the chance for empowerment. There are several legal cases in Canada that reflect families whose children were denied the right to empowerment based on laws which denied access to the education and basic liberties by stating only children with ASD between the ages of 2 to 6 would receive ABA services. In the cases of Weinberg, Destin, and Segarian in Ontario, supportive education among these various school boards was not provided at the public school level. As a result, these families filed lawsuits against the Ministries of Health, Education, and Social Services in order to fight for the rights of their children, to move them beyond care, seeking empowerment opportunities in healthcare and education regardless of their age. In the United States in 1982, the Board of Education of the Hendrick Hudson Central School District was sued by the Rowley family, defending their daughter's right to equal opportunity and fair education. Their daughter Amy was deaf and was initially provided with an interpreter in class. However, after a 2-week period, her instructor had deemed her a proficient lip reader, rendering his services unnecessary. In a follow-up IEP meeting, the family argued that the FM wireless device used in place of an interpreter was not sufficient in terms of allowing the same right and rightful education for their daughter as her peers. The Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975 at the time did not see the need or value in providing the requested support to individuals with disabilities in the school board. Laws and legislations of state governments did not account for the required supportive services to facilitate and empower disabled children to actually reach their optimal learning aptitude. The courts had deemed that the school board was only acting as a care provider to students with disabilities based on the EHA Act. and was never in their intent to provide services to empower and enrich the lives or provide opportunity to students they were allowing into their schools. The act served as another handicap for students in life who were being permitted into schools without any intent for follow-through, appropriate, or opportune education. Another question we were asked was, how do the legal outcomes relate to the pros and cons of this debate? So some of the pros we've discussed are that lawsuits that challenge government laws at all levels pay the way for future opportunities for those within the ASD community. Without the voices of the suffering, new legislations, centers, funding opportunities, and services may not even surface or even progress. It is unfortunate that it has come to this level. Families have to put forth their life savings, air their family history to the public based on the section of society that has deemed certain people ineligible to the same rights and freedoms that others openly have and take for granted. Other considerations are the impact on society. When we empower people, we release pressure on the system of care. When empowered, all members in the family are able to regain their own independence, trusting in treatment and services that have been afforded and made available to their children at any stage. Some cons are that families spend all their time and money in an already mentally, emotionally, and financially draining situation on maybe a whim or cloud of hope for change. The main fact that is in 2016, families are still fighting for their rights when the right to empowerment, fair and proper education, smooth transitions, and transition services should be provided automatically and not begged for and drawn out. In 2009, 62 lawsuits were studied surrounding families who had sued their school board over the fundamental and so-called routine expectations that had been violated based on the provisions of IDEA. Within these lawsuits examined, 63% of schools sued successfully triumphed their cases, where only 29% of the families involved within the 62 cases saw some form of justice for their child. Question 3 is what are the connections that can be made to our ethical codes? .05 Professional and scientific relationships. Students in the school board have been discriminated against because of their disabilities. And there is evidence to show that schools have not been provided equal opportunity to students in need. Post-secondary, we see adults who have been discriminated against by employees and employers.
2.05 Rights and prerogatives of clients. Client/students' rights have not always been held in regard. Families are left in the lurch, adults left without hope or plans. However, on the flip side, we have seen situations such as vocational rehabilitation services where providers are supportive and clients' rights are made paramount.
.09 Treatment efficacy and intervention. There is a historical evidence which indicates the best interests of clients have not always been at the forefront. In the case of Rowley, her sign language instructor did not act in her best interest. He did not provide her with the most effective treatment opportunities. The consequence to abandoning her voice and impeding her ability to learn were not considered. 2.15 Interrupting or discontinuing services. There are instances in which schools have not provided the opportunity for empowerment beyond their walls, where transition plans have been stalled, dropped, or no efforts have been made to facilitate continued services. However, in accordance with IDEA, when followed, transition plans, when started early enough, can provide and capture future opportunities.
4.02 Involving clients in planning and consent. To join in on their transition planning and services or any behavior treatment planning and changes if their functional level permits. This encourages another level of empowerment when seeking transitional services or looking at the next steps in life.
And our final question is, what do you see as the biggest promoter of empowerment to those with ASD? And on the flip side, what is the biggest proponent of care? So we saw time as a factor in empowerment and the key to most things autism. If we plan for transitions early, by the time a student graduates, they will have the necessary tools needed to be successful in that next chapter. When looking at empowerment overall, it's more than academics. Schools, students, and adults need to be provided with the opportunities to acquire and master daily living and social skills that are typical and relevant to the culture and society in which they live. In terms of care, we believe the biggest proponent here are families whose guilt or denial can become an overriding factor, therefore doing tasks their family members with autism could or would be able to do on their own. Without self-promotion from inside the family system, it is harder to empower and provide opportunities of independence for our students.
So in conclusion, both empowerment-targeted concepts and care-targeted concepts are looking out for what they believe to be the person's best interest. Based on our findings, empowerment more so promotes independence by providing services such as transitional services, which are designed to give the person a voice of their future goals, community employment counseling through VR, which is designed to promote independence through vocational goals, and supported community employment through the use of job coaches, which is designed to promote integration into the community. On the other hand, families have reported very negative experiences with transition services, which have often proven to fail due to a number of reasons, but mainly not allowing the individual to have a voice. VR costs seem to be high, with numbers such as Michigan spending $119 million in 2014, and employers having a negative outlook on hiring people with disabilities. With that being said, Team Care would choose to protect our clients from the negatives to promote health and safety, while Team Empowerment would promote independence in any way possible, particularly through competitive community employment. With ethical codes such as 2.05, Rights and Prerogatives of Clients, 2.09, Treatment Intervention Efficacy, 4.02, involving clients in planning and consent, and more being questioned on either or side, it can be a fine line and very situational as far as what is best for the individual with a disability, care, or empowerment. We have thoroughly enjoyed learning about the different aspects and hope you all have taken away some new knowledge from our debate. Thank you.